Welcome back, everyone. Today we're diving deep into a couple of really interesting sources you guys provided.
Yeah, this should be a good one.
It really should be. We've got a guidebook here geared towards financial beginners,
Right.
and then this other source, which is like I don't know, a collection of almost like contrarian takes on how to manage your money.
I'm interested to see how those two come together.
Me too. And that's the mission of today's deep dive, right? To figure out how these two very different approaches to finance can work together, maybe even complement each other.
Yeah, exactly. Because what I found really fascinating is that both sources, despite their differences, really stress the importance of aligning your financial decisions with your personal values and
It's
goals.
like they're both saying, hey, forget the one size fits all approach.
Yeah.
Like let's personalize this. Let's figure out what really matters to you as an individual and then build your financial plan around that. I love that. Okay, so let's start with the fundamentals, shall we? Budgeting. Our beginner's guide kicks things off with the classic 50-30-20 rule. Have you heard of
Yeah,
this?
it's a popular one for sure.
It's super simple. 50% of your income goes towards your needs, rent, groceries, bills. 30% goes towards your wants, so that's your fun money, dining out, entertainment, travel. And the remaining 20% is for savings and debt repayment.
Yeah, and the great thing about this rule is that it's not meant to be set in stone. It's a starting point. You can adjust those percentages based on your own individual circumstances and priorities.
Absolutely. It's about finding what works for you. Now, what I found really interesting is that our contrarian source actually touches upon budgeting as well, but from a completely different angle.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, instead of just focusing on the numbers, this source dives into the psychology of spending, like why we spend the way we do.
Interesting.
Yeah. It talks about something called behavioral finance, which explores how our emotions, our biases can influence our financial decisions.
That makes sense. I mean, we've all made impulsive purchases that we later regretted, right?
Totally. Or how about this? Have you ever held on to a stock even when it was clearly tanking, hoping against hope that it would rebound?
Ugh, yeah, I've been there. It's like that sunk cost fallacy in action.
Exactly. And that, my friend, is loss aversion in a nutshell. We're wired to avoid losses sometimes, even when logic tells us to cut our losses and move on.
So how do we combat these mental traps when it comes to our finances?
Well, that's where awareness comes in, right?
Mm.
By understanding these biases, we can start making more rational decisions. It's like having a superpower, being able to recognize those moments when our emotions are clouding our judgment.
I love that. So we've got our budget in place. We're working on mastering our financial psychology. What's next on the agenda?
Well, our trusty beginner's guide says it's time to build a safety net, an emergency fund.
Ah, yes, the rainy day fund.
Mm.
Always a good idea.
Right. Because life happens. Job loss, unexpected medical expenses, car breaking down. You want to be prepared for those curveballs. So the general advice is to aim for 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses tucked away in a safe and accessible account, like a high-yield savings account.
Makes sense.
Ah,
Having that financial cushion can really provide peace of mind, knowing you can weather those unexpected storms.
absolutely. But here's where our contrarian source throws a wrench in the works.
Oh, really? What do they say?
Well, they question whether a large emergency fund is always necessary, especially if it means missing out on potentially lucrative investment opportunities.
That's an interesting perspective.
Right. Like, what if instead of letting a large chunk of your savings sit in a relatively low yield account, you carefully invested a portion of it with the potential for higher returns?
It's a balancing act for sure.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You have to weigh the security of having a large emergency fund against the potential gains from investing. It all comes down to your risk tolerance and your individual financial goals.
Exactly. And speaking of financial goals, our beginner's guide emphasizes the importance of credit scores. It's kind of like your financial GPA.
I like that analogy.
Yeah, it tells lenders how responsible you are with money, how likely you are to repay your debts. A good credit score can open doors to lower interest rates on loans. Better credit card offers even more favorable apartment rental terms.
So it pays to keep that credit score in tip-top shape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our beginner's guide provides a handy roadmap to doing just that.
Oh, yeah. What are some other top tips?
Well, first and foremost, pay your bills on time. That's crucial.
Makes sense. Payment history is a big chunk of your credit score, right?
Huge. It shows lenders that you're reliable.
Yeah.
Then there's keeping your credit card balances low. Ideally, you want to keep your credit utilization below 30%.
Credit utilization, that's how much of your available credit you're actually using, right?
Exactly. And finally, avoid opening too many new credit accounts in a short period of time because that can actually hurt your score.
It's like they say, too much of a good thing.
Right. Precisely. Now here's where our contrarian source throws a curveball. They argue that not all debt is created equal.
Oh, I love where this is going. Tell me more.
Well, they suggest that strategically using debt, particularly when interest rates are low, can actually help you build wealth.
That's a bold statement.
It is. But hear them out. Imagine taking out a loan to invest in an asset that has the potential to appreciate significantly, like real estate or a well-positioned stock. If done carefully, the returns on that investment could outweigh the interest you're paying on the loan.
That's definitely a different way of looking at debt.
Right. It's about being strategic and aligning your debt with your overall financial goals, which actually ties into the whole good debt versus bad debt concept outlined in our beginner's guide.
Oh, yes, that's a
Yeah.
classic for a reason.
A mortgage, for instance, is often considered good debt because it allows you to buy an asset, your home, that typically appreciates in value over time.
Plus, you're building equity with each mortgage payment.
It's exactly. On the flip side, high-interest credit card debt, especially if it's from impulse purchases or non-essential items, is generally seen as bad debt because it can quickly spiral out of control and doesn't contribute to your long-term financial well-being.
It's all about being mindful of the type of debt you're taking on and making sure it aligns with your overall financial goals.
Precisely. Now, speaking of goals, let's shift gears from managing debt to planning for the future.
Sounds good to me. I feel like we could all use a little more long-term thinking in our lives.
Absolutely. And both of our sources couldn't agree more. They emphasize the importance of setting clear financial goals. Whether it's saving for a down payment on a house, early retirement, funding your dream trip, or even starting your own business, having a clear destination in mind can help you stay motivated and make smarter financial decisions along the way.
It's like having a roadmap for your money.
Exactly. But as we all know, life is full of surprises. And sometimes those surprises can throw a wrench in our best-laid plans. So how do we plan for the future when things are constantly changing? Well, that's where aligning your financial goals with your values can really help.
Oh, tell me more about that. I like where this is going.
So instead of just focusing on arbitrary numbers like I want to save X amount by this age, our contrarian source encourages you to dig deeper. Ask yourself what truly matters to you in life.
I like that. It's about finding your why.
Exactly. Is it financial security? Creative freedom? Making a difference in the world? Once you identify those core values, your financial decisions become less about chasing arbitrary targets and more about building a life that aligns with what you cherish most.
It's like your money becomes a tool to help you live a more fulfilling life.
Precisely. And this ties into our beginner's guide suggestion of breaking down those big long-term goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Right, because saving for retirement, let's say, can feel daunting, especially if you're just starting out.
For sure. It's a marathon, not a sprint. So instead of getting overwhelmed by this huge, distant goal, break it down into smaller milestones. Maybe it's automating a certain amount of savings each month, or increasing your contributions to your retirement account every time you get a raise.
Those small steps can really add up over time.
Absolutely. And it makes the journey less intimidating. Okay, are you ready to tackle investing?
I think so. It's one of those things that always seemed a bit mysterious to me.
I hear you. Investing can feel like entering a whole new world. But our beginner's guide does a great job of demystifying it. The key takeaway: start early, even if it's with a small amount.
I've heard that before, but why is starting early so crucial?
2 words: compound interest. It's basically the snowball effect of investing.
So the money you invest earns interest, and then that interest earns even more interest.
Exactly. It's like magic, especially over the long term. Your money is growing exponentially.
Now that's a concept I can get behind.
And to make investing even easier, our beginner's guide recommends looking into retirement savings plans like 401ks and IRAs.
Oh, yes, those workplace retirement plans and their individual counterparts.
Precisely. They often come with tax advantages, which basically means more money in your pocket in the long run.
Always a good thing.
Right. Okay, now, for those of you who are like, okay, this is all great, but I want my money to do more than just grow.
Yeah.
I want it to make a difference.
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
One of our sources dives into the world of ESG investing.
ESG, what's that all about?
So ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance. It's basically about investing in companies that align with your values.
So I could potentially invest in companies that are tackling climate change, promoting social justice, or practicing ethical corporate governance.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
about putting your money where your mouth is.
I love that.
Yeah.
So you're not just aiming for financial returns, but also trying to make a positive impact on the world.
Precisely. And if you're new to investing, ESG-focused ETFs are a great way to dip your toes into this
Yeah,
space.
they're TS. Sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, those are like baskets of stocks, right?
Yes, exactly. They offer a way to diversify your investments across multiple companies within a specific sector or theme. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something we touched upon earlier. Economic literacy.
Right, because understanding the bigger financial picture is crucial too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One concept that often trips people up is inflation.
Inflation.
Hmm?
That sounds a bit scary.
It can be. Basically, inflation erodes the purchasing power of your money over time.
What do you mean?
So let's say your favorite latte costs $5 today.
Okay.
With an annual inflation rate of, let's say, 3%, that same latte could cost you closer to $8 in 20 years.
Wow. So my money is essentially worth less in the future.
Exactly. That's why it's crucial to factor inflation into your savings goals and investment strategy.
It's like that saying, a dollar today is worth more than a dollar tomorrow.
Precisely. And speaking of dollars and their value, our contrarian source reminds us that true wealth extends far beyond our net worth.
That's such an important reminder, especially in a world that often equates financial success with overall well-being.
Right. Our mental and emotional health, our relationships, our
Mhm.
passions, those are all invaluable assets that contribute to a truly rich and fulfilling life.
Couldn't agree more.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive into the fascinating world of personal finance.
This has been a great conversation. We've covered so much ground from budgeting and saving to debt management, investing, and even the psychology of spending.
It's been quite a journey. But remember this, you are not alone on this path to financial wellness.
We all start somewhere, and the important thing is to keep learning, growing, and making informed decisions that align with your values and goals.
Exactly. And the more you learn about managing your finances, the more empowered you'll become in shaping your financial future. So go out there, explore those financial topics that pique your interest, experiment with different strategies, and never stop learning. This is your financial journey. You're in the driver's seat.
And just like that,